My Brother Sam is Dead, Chapter 13. I want to see Colonial Persons, please, I said. The adjunct stared at me through the half-open door. What about? Sam Meeker sent me. He's been arrested as a cattle thief. Colonial Persons can't be troubled about that. But it's all a mistake, I said. He didn't do it. He was chasing the ones who did. The adjunct laughed. Sure, he said. He didn't steal the cows. They followed him out of the barn of their own accord. Please, I begged, it's true. We were sitting there. Enough, he said. Colonial Persons is in bed. Come back in the morning, and perhaps he'll see you then. There wasn't any point in arguing with him, I realized. I would have to see Colonial Persons in the morning. The cows were still loose, and I had to do something about them anyway. Thank you, sir, I said, and turned and ran back over the empty spaces of snow towards the training ground. In the brightness of the moonlight, it was easy to see the forms of 3 cattle standing in the middle of the snowy field. As far as I could, I pushed out the snow towards them. As I came up, I saw the 4th cow lying on the ground. It was dead, half buried in the snow, and its belly had been sliced open, its guts glistening wet in the moonlight. The 3 living cows were staggering around in the deep snow and bawling unhappily. I found a stick in the tree line at the edge of the field and began driving the cattle home. It was a terrible job. They hated floundering around in the deep snow and balked constantly. It took me over half an hour to get them safely back to the barn. I drew them down some hay, and then I went to the tavern. Mother was sitting in front of the fire, looking worried. I saw you coming across the road, she said. Where's Sam? They arrested him, I said. The ones who stole the cattle beat him up, and then they said he'd stolen the cattle himself and marched him off somewhere. Back to the encampment? I guess so, I said. They'll let him go in the morning, won't they? I mean, all we have to do is explain it, don't we? She shook her head. I have a terrible foreboding, Timothy. I want to pray. The dead cow is still out there, Mother. I want to get it before somebody else does. If we haven't got time to pray to the Lord for help, we haven't got much time at all, have we? So we got down on our knees and prayed for Sam. Then I got the butchering knives out, and we went together into the snow field to cut up the cow. The meat was already beginning to freeze, making it hard to cut. We had to chop it into small pieces, too, because neither of us was strong enough to carry off a whole side of beef by ourselves. It took us an hour of struggling to cut the animal up and carry it home. We hid it in the barn loft under the hay. It would keep well enough in the cold weather. In the morning, I went back to Captain Bett's house to talk to Colonial Persons. They made me wait around outside the door for half an hour before they let me in. Colonial Persons seemed nice enough, but awfully busy. I told him the story, but he shrugged. It surprises me that Sam would be taken for a thief. I thought he was a man of greater patriotism than that, but people fool you. He didn't do it, sir. These other men... He held his hand up to stop me. I know, you told me that. In any case, there isn't anything I can do. They've taken him out to the encampment, and it'll be up to General Putnam to do what he wants. I'd get out there in a hurry, though. The general is determined to make an example of someone. It could go hard with Sam. General Putnam is a great and decided patriot, and he does not take defecation from duty lightly. Now I was beginning to get worried. At first it had seemed that it wouldn't take much to straighten the mistake out. After all, it was our cows that had been stolen. Surely they'd believe us when we told that Sam hadn't taken them. But the way Colonial Persons talked about it bothered me. He didn't seem to care very much whether Sam was guilty or not. It didn't seem very important to him. I said so to Mother. She looked sad. They've seen so much death, these soldiers. What does the life of one or more man mean to them? She sighed. Now we must go down to the encampment and try to save him. We couldn't both go. One of us had to stay and watch the tavern. We were required by law to keep open most of the time in case travelers came by. In any case, it was risky to leave the place unguarded. We decided that Mother ought to go. She was an adult. Her word would go better with General Putnam than mine would. She put on her bonnet and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and started out. I stood in the yard and watched her go down the road until she was merely a black spot in the field of white. Then I went out to the barn to look the cattle over more carefully, in case any of them had been hurt. Not that it mattered much. I was determined to butcher them as soon as I had the chance. Betsy Reed came into the tavern a half hour later. She hadn't bothered to comb her hair properly, and she looked scared. What's happened to Sam? I heard he was arrested for something. For stealing our own cattle, I said. She got angry. Sam didn't do that, she said. I didn't say he did. I told her the story. Mother's really worried. I've never seen her so down. Not even when we found out Father was dead. She bore up when he got captured, and bore up when we learned he died. But she isn't bearing up now. She's trying, but she isn't bearing up. It's not having enough to eat, Betsy said. You don't have the strength to keep your spirits up. She sat and dropped her head on the taproom table. What are we going to do about Sam? I don't know. Mother's finding out. Will they hang him if they think he did it? I don't know, I said. It seemed a good chance that they would be the way everybody was talking about how hard General Putnam was, but I didn't want to think about that. Probably they would just put him in prison. I wouldn't mind that, Betsy said. At least he wouldn't be able to get himself into any more trouble. I didn't say anything. All I could think about was Father and Jerry Sanford. Could your father do anything? Maybe, she said. I'll talk to him right away. She left. I was glad. I didn't want to dwell on Sam. There were plenty of things to do to keep myself busy. Besides my regular chores, I had to start getting ready to butcher. This meant putting up hooks for hanging the meat in the barn. We never butchered 8 head of cattle at one time, and we didn't have the hanging space for them. To occupy my mind, I spent my spare moments figuring out the best way to do it. And of course, people kept coming in. They were the usual customers, officers wanting food, ordinary soldiers wanting a chance to get warm, Reading people buying things. There were also people asking about Sam. Word had got around, and people wanted to know what had happened. Mr. Beach came in, and Mr. Heron and Captain Betts. I expected that Mother would be back by noon, but she wasn't, and by mid-afternoon I began to worry. I kept looking out the window about every 5 minutes, but still she didn't come. I got the supper stew started. It was about all we served to anybody anymore. It began to get dark, and then she came in. She looked exhausted. She slumped down in a chair by the fire. I gave her a glass of rum to warm her up, and was about to ask her what had happened, but just then some officers came in wanting dinner, and some drinks, and we got busy. It wasn't until an hour later, when we got the officers settled over their rum and water, that she could tell me the story out in the kitchen. She'd had to wait until the middle of the afternoon to see General Putnam. The aides kept putting her off and sending her away, but she stuck it out, and finally she got to see him. He was curt. He really didn't want to take the time. She told the story. He merely shrugged. You see what the problem is, Tim. Those 2 men who brought him in have sworn it was Sam who stole the animals. Her voice was slow and tired and hopeless. Sam wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be on duty with Colonel Parsons at the Betts house. But Colonel Parsons doesn't care. He always lets Sam come over and visit. Still, he wasn't supposed to. Officially, Sam had deserted his post. Why should they believe Sam about the cattle over the other men? Why should they believe me? I'm his mother. I'd certainly lie to save him. She paused. Go out and see if the officers need anything, and bring me some more rum. I'm cold. They wouldn't let us see Sam, but a few days later, Colonel Reed came to the tavern and sat down with Mother and me. He looked serious. I've been down to the encampment, he said. I've talked with some of the officers there. I'm afraid it looks bad for Sam. Would you like some rum, Colonel Reed? Mother asked. Her voice was harsh. I'm going to have some myself. Without waiting for him to answer, she brought the rum and poured 2 glasses. Thank you, Colonel Reed said. Why is it bad for Sam, sir? I asked. He slipped at the rum. Here's the problem. Those soldiers Sam caught with the cattle are scared to death Putnam will suddenly decide to hang all of them as an example. They're prepared to tell any kind of lie about Sam to get themselves off. If it were just Sam's word against somebody else's, it might be different. But there are 2 of them. And if they tell the same story, they can be convincing. He shook his head. Then there's the fact that Sam comes from a Tory family. We're not really Tories, though, I said. Father was. None of us are. That's not the way General Putnam's going to see it. But won't there be a trial, sir? I said. Oh, yes, Colonel Reed said. A regular court-martial. There will be presiding justice and a board of officers acting as the jury. but we have to face the fact that the board will do whatever they think General Putnam wants. And if they decide that Putnam wants to make an example of somebody, they'll hang. They'll bend over backwards to satisfy him, regardless of the evidence. What can we do? Pray, Colonial Reed said. Actually, there are some others going to be tried at the same time. A butcher named Edward Jones from Ridgefield, who was caught spying for the British, another man for stealing shoes, and another for desertion, I think. So there's always hope that they'll get enough blood out of the others to let Sam go. His war record is good, and that'll help. The trial was set for February 6th, 3 weeks away. There was nothing to do but wait it out. I didn't know what to think. I didn't see how they could find Sam guilty. He'd fought for 3 years. He'd risked his life. How could they decide to punish him for something he hadn't done? It just didn't make sense. 2 or 3 times I went out to the encampment to try to see him, but they wouldn't let me. They had him locked up in a cabin they were using for a prison, but they wouldn't even tell me which one it was, because they were afraid I'd smuggle a weapon to him, or help him escape or something. After I'd been out there a couple of times, they realized who I was, so they wouldn't even let me into the encampment. I figured I could sneak in after dark if I had to. They'd cut down most of the trees about for lumber and firewood, but there were rocks on the sides of the steep hill which led down to the encampment, and I figured I could come down in their shadows. But there wasn't any use in trying until I knew they were hitting him. So I gave up for the moment and waited. I was beginning to get worried about Mother. She'd never been one for drinking much, just a glass of rum punch occasionally, when she was chilled or sick. But she'd begun to take it more. Not that she was drunk all the time or anything like that, but sometimes I'd come upon her standing by herself with her eyes empty and staring and a little glass of rum in her hands. She'd hardly notice I was there until I spoke to her. It wasn't much, as I say, but she had changed, and it bothered me. Finally, February 6th came. Colonial Reed came in first thing in the morning. "I'm going out to the encampment," he said. "I'll bring back news tonight." All day long I was so nervous I couldn't eat. I couldn't sit still. I had to keep moving around, and I was glad when people came in wanting food or hot drinks so I could keep busy. Once 2 officers came in and ordered hot rum to warm up with. One of them said, "Did you see any of the court-martial?" "No," the other said. "Why bother? Putnam's determined to hang 'em all anyway." I shuddered, but I said nothing. It was after dark when Colonial Reed came in. He was tired. His shoulders were sagging and his face was grim. He didn't have to say anything at all. I knew what had happened. "Where's your mother?" "Out back in the kitchen." I went out and got her. She stood in the doorway, saying nothing. "Mrs. Meeker, I have bad news. They're going to execute Sam." She smiled politely. "That isn't news, Colonial Reed. I've known that for 3 weeks. That was the story. The man who had been caught stealing shoes would get 100 lashes. The deserter would get 100 lashes. The butcher, Edward Jones, was to be hung. Sam Meeker, cattle thief, was to be shot. The executions would take place on a hill near the encampment on February 16th, a Tuesday. The Sunday before, there would be a compulsory church attendance. It surprised me that I didn't cry or faint or anything like that. I was numb and nervous and nothing more, and I began making plans. The first thing I did was to go and see Colonial Persons. He put me off twice because he knew what I was coming for. But as he was quartered next door to us, he knew he'd have to see me sooner or later, and finally he did. "I can't help you," he said bluntly. "The court-martial has decided that is the end of it." "Then who can help me, sir?" I demanded. He stared at me. "General Putnam. Nobody but General Putnam." "All right, then. Give me a note to him, sir." "Why should I do that?" he asked. "Because Sam didn't do it. You know that's true." He stared at me. "Sir. Sir." He put his head down in his hands. "War is hard, boy. Sometimes we do a lot of things we don't want to do. A lot of very good men have been killed in this war, and all we can do is hope that it's been worth it. Maybe it hasn't. Maybe in the end we'll conclude that. But I don't think so. I think it will be worth it, despite the death and destruction." He raised his head again and looked at me. "No," he said. "I don't think that Sam stole those cows, but I can't prove it, and neither can you. Who knows, maybe he did do it after all." Maybe he had some kind of arrangement with those other men as to throw suspicion off himself. Sam would never have done that. He smacked his hand down on the desk. "Watch how you address me," he snapped. I blushed. "I'm sorry, sir." He put his hands behind his head and leaned back. "Do you want to know what General Putnam is thinking? It's this. He's thinking that he can't win the war if he doesn't keep the people on his side. He's thinking that he can't keep the people on his side if the troops are running amok among the civilian population, raping the women, stealing cattle, burning houses. He is determined to scare the wits out of the troops to keep them in line. And he's thinking that it doesn't matter very much who he executes to do it. So many men have died, so many mothers have wept, so many brothers and sisters have cried. He is thinking that in the long run, if he executes somebody, he'll shorten the war and save more lives. It doesn't matter to him very much who he executes. One man's agony is like another's. One mother's tears are no more wetter than anybody else's. And that's why he's going to have Sam shot." "But Sam isn't guilty, sir." "The court-martial says he was. But they're wrong." He sat silent. I waited. Then he said, "Because I happen to believe you, I'm going to give you a letter to see General Putnam. But I'm warning you right now that it won't do a bit of good. The one thing Putnam cannot do at this point is show clemency. If he's going to make his point with the troops, he can't start letting people off easily." He took up a piece of paper, wrote something on it swiftly, folded it and sealed it, and addressed it to General Putnam. Then he gave it to me, and I left, running. I ran almost all the way out to the encampment over the packed snow. The sky was cloudy. There would be snow and more snow. I arrived at the gate, my breath rasping in my throat so hard I couldn't speak. I handed my letter to the guard. He took it and called over his soldier. "Take this boy to General Putnam," he said. We walked up the encampment street past a long line of huts. They were identical, 100 of them with plumes of bluish smoke rising like a forest into the air. Soldiers were everywhere, cutting wood, cleaning things, drilling. Then we came to a house, bigger than the huts, but made of the same kind of logs. The soldier handed my letter to the guard at the door. The guard took it inside. In about 5 minutes he came back. "Just wait," he said. I waited for half an hour, and then an hour, and then 2 hours. Officers went in and out, and still I waited. I got hungry, but I didn't dare leave to go in search of something to eat. It became 1 in the afternoon, and then a soldier came out and brought me in. General Putnam was sitting behind a rough trestle table they'd set up for his desk. There were papers neatly arranged and ink bottles, pens, sand for blotting the ink, and a stack of maps. He was a big man, about 60, with lots of white hair. He wore a continental uniform of buff and blue. He did not look kind. "Meeker?" "Yes, sir." "All right, let's have it." He scared me. His voice was hard and his eyes flashed, but I told him the story exactly as it had happened, and I finished by saying, "Sam wouldn't steal our own cattle. He just wouldn't. He's been fighting for 3 years. He's been a good soldier, and he didn't do it, sir. I swear it. I know because—" "Enough," he said. "My time's valuable." He took up a piece of paper and quickly wrote something on it. Then he said, "I'll consider it. That'll be all. Sir, can I see my brother?" He frowned at me. Then he shouted, "Sergeant, take this boy up to the stockade to see Sam Meeker. See that they stay 6 feet apart and pass nothing between them." "Thank you, sir," I said, and then I followed the guard out. The stockade was situated just at the bottom of the slope which dropped down into the encampment. It was a wooden hut like the others, but surrounded on all sides by a picket fence to give the prisoners a place outdoors to walk around in. Guards were posted at every corner. There were some small holes cut in the fence, each about a foot square. The guard put his face to one of the holes and shouted, "Meeker, you've got a visitor here." Then he drew a line in the snow with his toe, about 6 feet from the fence. "Stay behind that line," he said. Sam's face appeared in the hole. He was dirty and unshaven, and his hair was uncombed. "Timmy," he said. "How are you, Sam?" I asked. "Oh, I'm all right for a man about to die." "Don't give up hope," I said. "I've just seen General Putnam, and he said he'd consider your case." "Is that right?" he said. "Really?" "He said he would." "What did he actually say?" Sam said. "Does he believe I'm not guilty?" I don't know, I said. He didn't say. You're a good boy, Tim. Sam, how come they found you guilty? I guess I didn't score enough telling points, he said. No, really. The other men lied. They knew they were in for it right from the moment I spotted them in the training ground. I only saw one of them at first, and I leveled the musket at him. But the other one was down on the ground in the shadows, gutting the cow, and he came up behind me and stuck his knife point against my back. So they got me. Then they bashed me around a little and took me in. Oh, they were smart. They had a story all worked out about hearing somebody shout, "Stop, thief," and seeing me driving the cattle across the training ground and coming out to get me. And of course, I wasn't supposed to be at home anyway. I was supposed to be on duty at the Betts house. So that went against me. And that was that. What else can we do, Sam? Pray, I guess. You'd better have Mother do that. The Lord's more likely to believe her than you, Tim. He grinned. I grinned back, but I felt all sick inside. Then the guard said, "Time's up, lad." "I'll try to get back to see you again, Sam," I said. "Say hello to Betsy for me," he said. "Yes." "And Mother," he said. "Yes," I said. "And I'll try to think up some more telling points for General Putnam, too." He grinned. "You're the best brother I've got, Tim." I tried to grin back. I better be. "Come on, you," the guard said. So I waved goodbye and left.